Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 22nd of June 2015, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host this afternoon, Brian Gerrish. With me in this studio, Mike Robinson.
Afternoon.
And behind the technical desk, we have Nick Green. Well, it's been raining here in Plymouth, so we've got a bit of a cool, gloomy June day, just after the longest day, I think, Mike.
Yes.
And of course, many people will have been out celebrating that, but that's a discussion for another day. Dartford has unfortunately got grey skies, heavy showers in Manchester. I think we'll leave it there. Well, if we need to cheer ourselves up, what better place, there can be no better place to go than the BBC. And interesting little story developing, being spread, of course, over the mainstream press that the BBC will lose power to rule over bias claims after UKIP row. So suddenly we have this quite substantial story that the BBC has been terribly biased to UKIP. They've been rigging studio audiences, nothing new there. But this has now come into the public domain, and there's calls that BBC needs to stop regulating itself and there should be another party to regulate it. Well, we just wondered whether this was a classic problem reaction solution going on here. Are we about to see the BBC being brought under direct government control, possibly? This would fit in very nicely with Media Standards Trust and the need to grip the BBC, do you think?
Well, I'm confused as to who might provide that independent oversight, since the BBC is so in with Ofcom and ATFOD and the other cowboys in this area that I don't know who they would actually get to do the job.
No. Well, the story is a pretty interesting one. We're going to stick with it because, of course, Lord Hall has been speaking out. Let's see what the great man has to say. On Thursday, the BBC Director General, Lord Hall, warns the government not to screw around with the corporation ahead of possible changes to the licence fee. He claimed that the BBC was one of the engine rooms of the creative industries in this country, and he warned that diminishing it would damage them all. So this is pretty interesting language. I just wondered what he actually meant by the fact that the BBC is a creative industry. I mean, do they produce cars or ships or food, or can you think of anything of productive value that the BBC produces, Mike?
Propaganda.
Okay, and so Lord Hall, the Director General, clearly worried that the BBC could lose their propaganda power if they were to be monitored. But then who would monitor them, as you say? More to this article than meets the eye. My personal opinion, for what it's worth, is that what we are going to see is the BBC pulled even closer to central government, so there can be maximum effect from David Cameron's Conservative government's propaganda. Well, is the BBC reporting finance at all, or where's that going to take us?
Well, it takes us to Greece and the European Union. So today, in fact right now, your so-called Eurozone leaders are at an emergency summit in Brussels for last-ditch talks. And this is to try to stop Greece from refusing to pay what is claimed is owed. So this is following 1.75 billion euros of emergency loans, which were handed out on Friday to try to keep the Western financial system afloat. But in fact, there's no real expectation that a deal will be done today. Everyone concerned saying it's going to be a few days before anything is possible, if anything is possible at all. And typical of this mindset, of course, the so-called markets are actually putting money in, just so that they're making a bet that Tsipras will actually cave in under the pressure and decide that starving some more Greeks to death might be the best option. Now, as I say, not many people believe that at the meeting believe that too much is going to happen today. Austria's finance minister, who's Hans-Jörg Schelling, he has told reporters that he doesn't think there's going to be a final deal today, and he's suggesting that Greece should start picking up the paying for the meetings that are taking place to discuss what they do. Jeroen Dijsselbloem, who's president of the Eurogroup, he also said that he didn't expect a breakthrough today. Well, I don't expect a breakthrough today. At the end of the day, as we mentioned on the news last week, we have many instances in many instances in Greece where 3 generations of families are having to live off one pension. They've already had their pensions cut by 30-40%, and that's really what the EU is asking them to do once again, is further cuts to pensions. Of course, it's not just in Greece that we can expect cuts to pensions, because here's Georgie Boy getting ready for his July budget, his emergency budget, where he's expecting to impose £12 billion of welfare cuts. Of course, those cuts mostly affecting the richest in the country, as you would expect, Brian, yeah?
Yeah, of course.
Of course, yes. But of course, just as with Greece, he's targeting pensions, and perhaps that's because, as we've mentioned many times before, we have such a huge black hole in our finances with regard to pensions. And as we know, those pesky old people who've been contributing their tax dollars all these years, they're just living much too long and we can't afford them. So we have to ask the question why they can't just die, don't we, Lord Falconer? But moving on, well, what have we got here? It's time to hold physical cash. It's rare that we get this type of comment from a hedge fund manager, but this is Ian Spreadbury, who manages £4 billion of investors' money for Fidelity. And he's concerned that a systemic event, possibly of similar scale to what happened in 2008, is going to happen again. And the best strategy to deal with this, he says, is for investors to spread money widely into different asset classes, including gold and silver, as well as cash. But strangely enough, he does say that cash should probably be held in savings accounts, which does seem like a crazy idea under the circumstances. He did point out, however, that only £85,000, which must be a problem to you, being a millionaire, Brian, but £85,000 is the only amount of savings that are protected under the Financial Services Compensation Scheme.
Well, it's also worrying for the £3.65 billion budget that the UK, because the BBC's got the £3.65 billion budget. Yeah, they will probably be deeply worried. Lord Hall, I should think, will be worried as well.
Well,
Chris Evans will probably have to buy a second-hand car.
Indeed, just for Top Gear. But anyway, as we mentioned last week, of course, the European Commission is very concerned that 11 countries have not yet put in place bail-in plans, and the EC gave them 2 months to do so. And so the question is, why 2 months? Well, of course, the hint, comes from Greece, because on the 20th of July, roughly 2 months after that original statement was made, 2 Greek bonds totaling €3.5 billion, plus, of course, all the casino derivative bets that are sitting on top of those bonds, come due to the European Central Bank. Now, Spreadbury doesn't say where people should store their cash. He also doesn't say whether or not that cash should be worth anything, would be worth anything even if they had somewhere safe to store it. But of course, once those bonds come due, if Greece does default, there is a good chance that bail-in is going to be the policy. And so savings, you better have somewhere pretty safe to have them, not in a savings account with a bank, as Royal Bank of Scotland adequately proved once again last week.
Something building, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's we can see the pieces coming together. Do you want to have all your money in a bank? We don't think so. Well, George Osborne's father-in-law has been speaking out, clearly well informed on all sorts of matters. Let's have a look at what he's been having to say. Here we are, the Telegraph, and he said that the military and the government, David Cameron, of course, should ignore moaning American generals on defence cuts. He says that US generals are spouting damaging nonsense about Britain's retreat. And Lord Howe, suggests that defence cuts could actually improve Britain's military. Is this a bit of Alzheimer's creeping in? I mean, let's think about this. This man is sitting at home by his fireside and saying that American generals have no idea what they're talking about, and that the savage cuts on Britain's military, which means that we don't have aircraft on our aircraft carriers, our nuclear submarines are having grave problems due to spares. They're worn out, basically. We haven't got the right aircraft in the RAF. The army is lacking in manpower for even a basic campaign in Europe. And don't worry, because father-in-law of George Osborne says this is all good for the military. So is this gentleman smoking something? What can you be on to come out with these sorts of comments? Or is the whole article about actually confusing the public and distracting people from what the real issue is?
Don't know, but on Thursday night when Phil McConnell arrived in Plymouth, I was able to show him the entire British Navy, which was of course in the Plymouth Sound.
The single ship.
I'm not even sure whether that was actually a British naval ship or not, but there you go, yes.
Okay, so stick with the Osborne family, because they think that defence cuts are a good thing, and the more you cut your defence, the stronger you are. So this is clearly sensible conservative logic. If I can just add a bit to that slide, Nick, let's have a look at that, because Mr. Fallon, the Defence Secretary, got involved, and he said basically he wants the overseas aid budget, which I think is about around £8 billion. He wants that amalgamated in defence, because he thinks this is the right way to go. And then David Cameron can fudge the figures for the 2% that NATO is demanding. Now, we're not going to support NATO here. What we're doing is showing that there's a pack of lies being spread through Westminster at the moment. We've got George Osborne's dad-in-law. He's been summoned. Put on your carpet slippers and speak to the public. Madness, or is this propaganda? This is playing with people's minds, surely. Well, okay, what's the good news? The good news is, of course, that UK column website and forums going well. Mike's just got a little bit of an update on the forums themselves.
Yeah, so we did release the website last Monday, so we've been up for a week. But what I didn't have was the old forums available for people to search and so on. That's now available. There is a search box, and you can get to it from ukcolumn.org/old forums. But if you haven't yet looked at the new website, please do so, and please join us if you wish.
Okay, thank you for that, and we thank all of you who've actually been kind enough to send us emails or texts saying how much you like the new website. There's still work to do. There's still articles to go up, so stay with it. But it appears from the comments overall that you like what we're doing, so thank you for that. Now, as a special announcement in the news, we are able to give an update on Melanie Shaw. Remember, Melanie was the very brave abuse survivor who spoke out not only on her own abuse at Beechwood Children's Home in Nottingham, but as a result of her speaking out, some 150 other people came forward to talk about abuse while they were children. And this is now spreading to at least 6 or 7 other children's homes in the Nottingham area. And thanks to Mickey Summers and his group, there is now an active push for a survivor-led inquiry into child abuse issues in the Nottingham area. Now, Melanie spent considerable time in prison, first of all, while waiting for her trial to do with arson and criminal damage. She was convicted of that. During her time in Sodexo profit-making prison, she was subjected to solitary confinement. She was abused and clearly harassed and intimidated. And of course, medical symptoms were untreated, a very serious leg ulcer. Well, after she was out, Melanie again subjected to harassment and bullying by Nottingham police. And then, as far as we're concerned, she was picked up on questionable charges, which we believe was imprisonment of a paramedic, false imprisonment of a paramedic. This very vulnerable lady apparently held a male paramedic captive. Now, Melanie has been released. We know this is factually correct, and we understand that this may be due to the fact that she was sentenced to 6 months in prison, and at the time of that sentencing, she had already spent virtually 6 months in prison, during which most of the time, 98% of the time, she spent in solitary confinement. So we are delighted that Melanie Shaw is out. We're delighted that there are already people in the Nottingham area coming around Melanie to support her. And that lady needs as much support and protection from the public as possible because, of course, remember, not only did she blow the whistle on her abuse, but that of other children. And indeed, Melanie maintained that children were being murdered. To date, there appears to be no full police investigation by Nottinghamshire Police.
Can I just clarify something? We understand she received a 6-month sentence. Is that right?
Yes, we think so.
So whereas other people get bail and then go back for sentencing, get a 6-month sentence, and then serve maybe 3 months of it, they kept her in that whole time in solitary confinement, 23 hours a day, little light, almost no windows in the place.
She was very cold for a lot of that time, she told us.
But she doesn't get a reduced sentence. She has to serve her full sentence.
Well, she's a child abuse victim, Mike. Yeah. So what does David Cameron, Theresa May, Alison Saunders, head of the Crown Prosecution Service, what you do with child abuse victims is you victimise them further. So it's pretty obvious that the British state, desperate to silence Melanie Shaw and others like her, because, of course, the trail of child abuse in Britain today leads straight to the establishment and Westminster in particular. Well, let's follow that through. How does this present government deal with the wider issues of child abuse? Well, let's just have a look at this man, Mr. Janner. So the Mail here reporting that Lord Janner made secret visits to the Lords after being declared unfit for police questions over child abuse allegations. And in quite a comprehensive report, they're talking about him going into Westminster, parking his car. The inference was that he must have been driving his car. That's not known for certain. But of course, what does this suggest? It suggests this man is perfectly capable of asking police questions. Well, why wouldn't they question him? Well, let's have a look at this lady. Here she is, Alison Saunders, head of the Crown Prosecution Service. This is the lady who could put Melanie Shaw, child abuse survivor, in prison for speaking out. Alison Saunders could do that. But when it came to Grenville Janner, she apparently consulted a former colleague of his son. And she chose a barrister's chambers to speak to, which just happened to include one of the colleagues of Lord Janner's sons.
No conflicts of interest.
No conflicts of interest. Had a bit in. Oh, sorry. Right, just hold it a second. Just hold it, if you will, Nick. Sorry. There we go. She consulted Neil Moore, who until the end of last year worked at the 23 Essex Street Chambers with Daniel Janner QC before she decided not to prosecute Lord Janner over child sex abuse allegations. So you can prosecute a victim, you can prosecute somebody who's been raped, horribly abused from the tiniest of tots. But if you're anywhere near Westminster, I'm afraid it's just not possible. Well, it's pretty easy to see what's going on, but let's get into it in some detail. Here's the headline. Crime chiefs, 750,000 UK men want child sex. So this is the Mail on Sunday, major article continuing over, double page spread inside. And this is having us believe that 750,000 UK men are paedophiles. And of course, if there's 750,000 men, by the known statistics, roughly the same number are women. So 1.5 million people, apparently, according to this detailed article, want to have sex with children. Well, who's the man who put it together? Here he is. It's an exclusive by Ian Birrell. And in the article, it says the shocking figures come from estimates based on academic research and the best available evidence from other sources. So we actually decided to phone up the National Crime Agency and CEOP for the source of the statistics. They couldn't provide them.
Sorry, they couldn't provide the source for the statistics?
No.
So a major article appears on the front page of the Daily Mail over the weekend and then is replicated in most other mainstream news outlets on the web today. But we don't know what the source of the figures is.
That's absolutely correct. And the Daily Mail was so disturbed by the fact that we took the trouble to speak to them in person that the duty editor put the phone down when questioned over the accuracy of the story and the source of the statistics.
So the deputy editor also didn't know the source of the statistics, is that correct?
Not only did not know, but was quick to point out that Mr. Birrell wasn't in the Daily Mail headquarters building this morning. He isn't here at the moment, but when I pointed out that this was a story overwhelmingly in the public interest, which appeared to be based on missing statistics, she got very jittery and I've got to say a little bit abrupt, and click, down went the phone. So let's have a look at this story and ask a few questions. So here is the double page spread inside, and my goodness, they're going for it. Here we are, 1 in 35 may be a child abuser. May. We've got this one. Astonishing figures from UK's FBI reveal the full scale of potential paedophiles. We've got a personal by Karen Bradley, the UK abuse minister, and she's talking about cases which have come to her, how serious the child abuse issue is. And as usual, they go on to say where to get help, and where, of course, you directed to. Well,
can I just say that's up above that? That's an absolutely disgusting subheadline. Our shock at what this says about the nature of humans.
Humans are child abusers,
yes,
according to the Daily Mail. So some pretty interesting stuff in this article, and it's having us believe that 1 in 35 may be a child abuser, but that's only men.
Yes.
We've still got the women, which they don't want to talk about. And could this be that basically what is going on here is the government is saying, well, of course, everybody has a potential to be a child abuser, so don't focus on politicians or top judges or members of the establishment, because it's really part of human nature.
That's exactly what they're doing. Absolutely disgusting, and it looks like they're attempting to normalise it. This is normal behaviour, is what they're saying.
Yeah. So
don't. Yeah.
Massive dilution of a significant problem. So here's the National Crime Agency site, and of course you would expect it to be featuring.
Sorry. Just put that up, Nick, please.
You would expect it to be featuring the this amazing announcement, and of course pointing people to the evidence. But they're talking about pet cats, apparently.
Yes. So no mention of this. You would think that when this is such a major article appearing in the mainstream news over the weekend and in all other newspapers today, you would think that that would be their top billing on their news section of their website, wouldn't you?
Well, you'd have thought so, but apparently cats are more important than child abuse on the website at the moment.
Indeed.
Yeah. Okay. Right, well, let's have a look at Mr. Birrell. Here he is. You can obviously easily Google him. Unlike the statistics, you can easily Google Mr. Birrell and have a look at who he is. And of course, he's a highly experienced journalist. He's been published in The Guardian, The Wall Street Journal, The Economist, The Daily Mail, The Financial Times, The Times, The Observer, The London Evening Standard, The Sun, The Daily Telegraph, Sunday Telegraph, Independent on Sunday, Prospect, New Statesman and The Spectator.
That probably explains why it got such wide coverage then.
Indeed, but of course he is also, according to his own words, a speechwriter for David Cameron, and he did so in the run-up to the 2010 general election. So I just wonder whether a question is important. Would a Mail on Sunday headline branding, 750,000 UK men as potential child abusers be of help to David Cameron's government?
Can't imagine.
Well, if we were going to spread and dilute the whole question of where are the paedophiles in the Westminster establishment, possibly it would. But let's have a look at how this story has gone, because here's the Deccan Chronicle. And if you have a look at this, so this is this story going worldwide, excuse me. Here's a quote: a shocking analysis by the National Crime Agency reveals that about 1 in 35 adults poses a potential risk of being a child abuser or of seeking out child sex images online. But remember that the NCA story appears to be based on no evidence. They certainly haven't provided the evidence and the statistical base to the UK column, but this story is now spreading, and somebody sent us in this from the Straits Times. This is Singapore Press. It's the United Nations saying there's 750,000 paedophiles online. And we just wondered, was it the UN analysis that's the source of the National Crime Agency's 750,000 UK abusive men story?
So this is a United Nations report published in 2009, and of course this is a global figure. And
Yes.
suddenly the National Crime Agency appears to be applying that figure to national statistics.
Well, it's possible they made a mistake. I mean, they're a professional crime agency, so they're going to be pretty diligent, but it is possible that they've made a mistake or got confused. But if they could point us to the source of the statistics which they've used, and indeed the evidence which Mr. Birrell says exists, that would help clear matters up, I think. So let's do a little recap then. Here we are. The UK column asked for the source of the 750,000 abusive men statistics. These were the replies. The National Crime Agency told us they're readily available online. We asked where. They said readily available. We asked where. They said find them yourself. We spoke to CEOP, the Child Exploitation and Online Protection Centre. They said we're actually the same as NCA, but those statistics are readily available online. And let's remember the Daily Mail said, well, Ian Birrell is not in. You've spoken to me before. I'm not speaking to you. Click. So there we are. If you're interested in the story, it's unbelievably serious. It would appear that the Daily Mail would have 750,000 men in UK branded as paedophiles. However, we still have not seen a single politician or senior member of the establishment brought to book for that very offence. Well,
so we move on to Michael Gove, because of course, you know, they can't tell us where this figure 750,000 came from. And in fact, it seems that we're not going to be able to ask terribly readily in the future, because Michael Gove reckons that information is just too freely available, and we got to stop it. We got to stop it now. So he is, of course, the Justice Secretary, and he's considering making it more difficult to get information through the Freedom of Information Act, because he's going to. One option that he's considering is to allow officials to count thinking time when calculating how much it costs to retrieve information. So at the moment, the maximum cost that can be justified under the Freedom of Information Act, if you make an application for information, if it's going to cost more than £600 if you're a government agency, or £450 if you're another type of public body, then they can refuse to give that information out under the Act. He's actually looking at either bringing those thresholds down, or else saying that, well, we'll keep the thresholds where they are, but you can include thinking time in how you make that calculation. So if it takes you, 5 hours to think where to put the big black line through the document, then that puts you over the threshold, and you can just refuse to give the information in the first place.
I think I'm correct in saying, of course, it was Michael Gove, who was one of the senior Cameron government ministers, who felt that we shouldn't waste time investigating child abuse in Westminster. I think that was true. I also think it's true that he was happy to get on a public stage in London and express his loyalty to the Zionist movement in Israel, not to the British people. So I think there are a few questions about where Mr. Gove's loyalty lies. But we've also seen Jack Straw originally trying to prevent children in care from speaking out. He was trying to make it so that if you were in care and being abused, you would not be able to speak to the press or the media. So we seem to have some confused thinking by our senior politicians when they get near the truth. They don't seem to like the truth coming out to the public.
No.
I wonder why.
Well, of course, it may not be a problem for too much longer, because they're going to kick them all out of Parliament anyway and put them in other places. The question is where. That's a good question. But it seems that they've been so incompetent with managing budgets over the last 30 or 40 years that they haven't bothered to do any maintenance in this building. We've talked about this many times before. And so they're going to look at a number of options for what to do. £4.7 billion option is to throw them all out and they can go elsewhere while they do the repairs to this building. Or the £7.1 billion option is to do the repairs while they're in situ. Personally, I think I would take the building that size, probably still not cheap. Let's say £500 million option, just break up the doors and not let them out until they've sorted these issues out. Mm-hmm. The issues of national credit, paedophilia and other criminal activity by themselves.
Indeed. Well, I think at this point I would like to say, if you're watching David, it was David Noakes who initially wrote the article in the UK column newspaper where he said that shortly after the signing of the Lisbon Treaty, what we will see in the future is the close down of British Parliament. And if I remember that article accurately, I'm pretty sure that David Noakes also said what they will use is some form of excuse over the state of the building. There'll need to be substantial refurbishment. They can't get enough mouse traps in there to catch all the rodents. So they're going to have to decant the MPs. And of course, what this actually does as a stroke is breaks up the British government. London no longer the seat of power in UK. And we've heard a number of political voices calling for Parliament to be re-established in Manchester or even Birmingham.
Well, of course, this is part of David Cameron's One Nation policy, and in fact he was making a speech just as we were preparing to come on air, so I didn't get very much of it, but he was saying, I want everyone in this country to have an opportunity to get on and make a good life. That is the task for the next 5 years. I want to make a bigger and deeper argument about how we realise the One Nation ideal and help everyone achieve their full potential. This is the change we need to move from a low-wage, high-tax, high-welfare society to a higher-wage, lower-tax, lower-welfare society. And really, there's some sheer hypocrisy in that, since just like with the building that they occupy, it is his and his predecessors' policies that have brought about the disaster that we face. So in this case, with this building, for example, a couple of years ago, they built a new car park underground, which intentionally, well, at least they permitted the developer to completely undermine the foundations. That's a large chunk of that £4 to £7 billion budget. And the same with the economy. They have systematically destroyed it, as we've mentioned, with their long-term economic disaster. That's why we've got low wage. Yes.
Well, I was going to say that they've actually put Lord Janner's life at risk because I think he parked his car in that underground car park.
Oh, did he?
Yeah.
That was when maybe that's because he had dementia.
Yes, quite possibly.
Okay. Finally, for me anyway, let's just have a quick chat about this, because this is the International Journalists Network, and they are echoing something that we've been saying for weeks, if not months now, and that is use encryption. Use it all the time. Send your shopping list to each other, encrypted. Send whatever you like, encrypted. Make sure everything goes encrypted. Because the government doesn't want you to do that, and that's good enough reason as far as I'm concerned. And if you send everything encrypted, basically it becomes much, much more difficult for the authorities and corporations to snoop on what you're doing. Or let's put it another way, it becomes much more expensive for them to snoop on what you're doing. So I just wanted to highlight a couple of the potential solutions that these people are putting forward here. One is Jitsi. Now, Jitsi is a similar application to Skype, does pretty much the same kinds of things, except your video calls, your audio calls, and your instant messaging are all sent encrypted end to end. So have a look at Jitsi. Another one is CryptoCat. This is an open source application, plugs into your browser, and you basically it end to end encrypted chat. And another one is Perio. These are the three that article is highlighting. There are many others, and indeed, this is an area that we're going to be giving more information on in the coming days and months. So, encrypt everything.
And talk more. This is the key to things. The state would have us all so fearful people don't communicate. So don't take any nonsense with this. I'm not speaking, I'm not using this, I'm not talking on the telephone. What we need across the UK is good people to be speaking to each other as much as possible, and of course alerting friends, family and the wider public to the fact we essentially got a war going on. We're being attacked by our own government. We might call it the new battle for Britain. Communication's vital, of course, and we need the truth to be passed across as many lines of communication as possible. Lord Falconer, a renowned politician, one who we admire greatly, has been speaking out, and he says that, he says the Iraq war was, it was a mistake, Mike. He says that, Tony Blair got it wrong. Yes, he was actually advising Tony Blair, but it was just all a terrible mistake. Here is the article from Press TV. Charles Leslie Falconer, a life peer in the House of Lords, bit of an oxymoron there, he's more interested in death, a life peer in the House of Lords, and one of ex-Prime Minister Tony Blair's staunchest allies has said the Iraq war was a mistake and that British forces should not have gone into Iraq in 2003. And we'll just say, so one of Blair's close political and legal advisors dismisses an unlawful war which cost at least 180,000 lives. Many say that's a gross underestimate. It was just a bit of a silly mistake, and we won't do it again. Shouldn't this man be brought in front of a court?
Are you sure he said he wouldn't do it again?
No, I did actually put those words in his mouth.
Right.
But Tony Blair, of course, still walking free, charging vast amounts of money to give speeches. Tony Blair's now been sent into the Eastern European region, Ukraine, to help bring about peace. After all, he's done such a good job in the Middle East. And now his former flatmate, I think, dear old Charlie Falconer, says, there weren't any weapons of mass destruction. 200,000 people died, and they're still dying of cancer from the depleted uranium. But not to worry, we made a bit of a mistake, and I'm going to carry on eating the buns. Great. Well, there you are. British politics under David Cameron's Conservative government, as we're very happy to do. If you're listening from overseas in one of the troubled regions, Syria, Palestine, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, as just a few, we apologise for the outrageous and criminal actions of the British government.
I have a couple of announcements.
Carry on.
Okay, no Crane reporter fracking nightmare tonight. Ian's not in the southwest, so he'll be back next Monday night. There was a question in the chat box regarding financial help for Melanie. What's the situation with that?
We understand that a small group of good people are in contact with Melanie and discussing that issue. We believe that she's already had some financial help. This is important for her because certainly as of Friday, she was back in the situation she previously found herself, that she cannot access her bank accounts and she cannot access benefits. All of this seems to have been stopped or blocked. And as usual, Nottingham City Council and Nottingham Social Services are doing absolutely nothing to help this lady. Outrageous. If you have a spare moment this afternoon, please phone or email, tweet, Twitter, David Cameron, Theresa May, Alison Saunders. Ultimately, they're responsible. But we can get some financial help to Melanie if you would like to do that.
But if you do that, if you're using the PayPal donate button on the front of the website, please make sure it's labelled well as for Melanie, because I don't want to mix up anything that isn't for us. And the other final piece of final comment is no news tomorrow.
No news tomorrow.
Right, so we'll be back on Wednesday. Sorry for that, but other events have taken over, as it were.
Indeed. Thanks very much for joining us. So we'll see you same time on Wednesday. Bye-bye.